Jai Bharat, Jai Hind, and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Adi Achint. It's been a while we've spoken about Ukraine in a solo show with me. I thought it was time to actually just do a roundup of what's happening in that war stricken country. What's the game that Russia is going to play going forward as the ground is now freezing up? And of course, the big announcement by the NATO Secretary General who says we don't have weapons anymore. Let's wait and watch and let's see what's happening in Ukraine. Before that, guys, let me request all of you please do like this video, subscribe to the channel, and yes, of course, please hit the bell icon so that you get the notifications of Dev Talks daily shows in the evening. If you can, please do contribute to the Dev Talks efforts, and I'll be very, very grateful. There are loads of comments which have already come in, so that's encouraging. Let's kind of see what's happening in Ukraine and take this discussion forward. As usual, I have some slides ready for you guys so that we can take it subject by subject and see what's happening in that little country. Not little, anyways. What's happening in Ukraine? Interesting cartoon that I've actually found. I thought I'll just share it with you guys. Let's go forward. Now, this is something interesting. Now, I can't personally verify the validity of this particular document, but there is a website. I tried accessing it, and it does open. I just didn't have the time to kind of go through the entire bunch load of papers over there. This is February 9th, 1990, time of 1 p.m. to 3 p.m., place Kremlin. Now, this is Secretary of State James Barker sitting with President Gorbachev and talking about NATO. He said, we understand the need of assurance to the countries in the East. We maintain a presence in Germany, and that is just part of NATO. There would be no extension of NATO's jurisdiction for the forces of NATO 1 inch to the east. Now, is this part of Russian propaganda, or is this something which is actual reality? If it is, this is something that the Russians have been actually talking about for a while now. So loads of little things, details are slowly starting to come out. I guess a lot to do with Twitter, kinda sorta at the moment seeming a little open. But let's see what's happening in the ground war. Big news came in today that a township called Solidar has actually fallen. Now, I've drawn this line, which I did last time as well, just to explain to you where the entire battlefront is today. Now, on the north, where you look right on top of your screen, you have this little city called Kremenaya. You go a little south of that, you've got another city called Solidar, which is where today there is news which is confirmed by literally Western media outlets that this city has fallen. There's another city, these are kind of twin cities called Bakhmut. If you go a little further south, you've got cities like, you've got the main big city, which is Donetsk. Around Donetsk, there are two smaller cities. One is called Avdiivka and second is called Marianka. Avdiivka, the battle is kind of going on. Marianka, which is on the southern part of Donetsk, is fully under the control of the Russians. And right where this red line ends is a small town called Bugladar. So this is the main battle line which has been drawn by the Ukrainians, which they have kind of prepared their defenses. There's a battle of Bakhmut which is taking place, which is towards the top of the screen. You can actually realize that there is a bit of a heavy battle that has been taking place there for the past about 3 to 4 months. A lot of us, including me, have wondered why this battle actually took so long for the Russians to kind of bring to a certain conclusion. Today, I think I have a certain clue. So let's go forward and we'll probably be able to, decipher it for you. The blue marked area is the area of Donbass, which is the Donetsk People's Republic, the one part of it. Luhansk, which is marked in green, is pretty much, under the control, except for a very few little places of the Russian army. And of course, the militias that are operating there. Now, Bakhmut is very critical if you look at it for the Ukrainians. There are a couple of reasons that come out from this. Now, there are two lines, if you can see over this map I've drawn. One is both are the black lines. The first smaller black line on the right hand side of the screen is basically the place of Solidar to Bakhmut. Now, these, as I said, are twin industrial towns. They were very, very heavy industrial towns back from the Soviet Union time. They were set up uh, during the Soviet Union time, and they're very urbanized places, right? So Bakhmut is a place, as we've discussed in the last talk that I had done about Ukraine, is kind of a center point. Now, if you notice all these yellow lines going across from this city at the south end of this little line, this the city of Bakhmut, when all these roads are kind of crisscrossing, and that's what a lot of analysts are kind of figuring out, that this is a junction point and this has a lot of control over the entire area. So that's why this battle is taking that much more time, as well as the factor that's also the reason why the Ukrainians have been dumping in more and more reserves into this place to kind of fight this out street by street, literally house by house. The battles have been really, really bad. You guys just Google Bakhmut battle and you'll see the Google images. They're terrible. So it reminds you of the First World War images that came out. Second World War was as destructive, but this is, quite bad. Now, this U-shaped arrow that I have given you, this is basically the road which goes from Bakhmut to these twin cities in the little bit of the northwest of the state of or the Republic of Donetsk People's Republic. They are twin cities called Sloviansk and Kramatorsk. There is The Ukrainians today are building up battle lines in this particular area. Having said that, I'm not a military person, but spoken to some people who don't think they will be as effective as the current battle line, which is this big red line I show you on the screen. Let's sorry, let's move forward. So this is called a Bakhmut line. Solidar is now a confirmed news. I will show you. This has also been kind of confirmed by the British media, by the US media, and Ukrainians as well. A lot of Ukrainian bloggers are now talking about withdrawals from Solidar. There was a small little offensive in Kremenaya. You remember that small little town that I showed you at the top end of the red line that I had drawn? It got beaten back, and they've been trying to do this now. So I guess the Ukrainian main tactic is offensive is the best defense. So they will keep on pricking the Russian lines to find a gap somewhere or the other. I don't think they have a big offensive in mind. They just want to divert Russian attention to various different places so that they're not able to consolidate their forces. To an extent, till a while, it was working when the Russians were not fully, mobilized and stuff like that. Today, they have the manpower, so it's not really having the kind of effects. Salt mines. Now, this is something very interesting. The twin cities of Bakhmut and Solidar are famous for these underground salt mines. Now, the UK, which is the United Kingdom, said that part of the fighting, and this is the British intelligence, by the way, part of the fighting has been focused on the entrances to the 200-kilometer long disused tunnels that both Russia and Ukraine are likely concerned because it could be used for infiltration behind their lines. 200-kilometer long tunnels under the ground. These are old salt mines. I'll show you a picture of the salt mine here so you get a fair idea of the size of these places. Probably this is one of the highest places, but what I have read and what I will also show you is that these things are capable to actually transport tanks and stuff like that underneath the surface. So they're actually known as underground cities. Just take a height reference of the man standing there and the roof on the top, so you kind of realize what I'm talking about. Going back, Mr. Prigozhin. Prigozhin is the owner, CEO, the main guy of Wagner. He says he's confirmed his interest in the mines, calling them the icing on the cake. Obviously, if you've got that big an underground city, now the first photograph on the top is hundreds of people of Ukraine. They're doing this, big ass concert there, and there's music and this and that and the other. And the bottom photograph shows you the Ukrainian army. Probably looks like a command center, and that's what the Russians have been saying, that there's this command center underground, which and they've been targeting it, but of course, because of the kind of thickness of the mines, I don't know what the ground effect is, whether it survived like this or not. This is just a Google image for reference that I've put up. Prigozhin also described them as a network of underground cities that can hold up a big group of people, depth of 80 to 100 meters, which can allow tanks and other military vehicles to move freely. Mandar, I just saw your correct comment, and you're right. The Cold War era was wild. Underground cities. I mean, this is something which was I've been researching on these mines. I didn't want to put it out in my last video because I didn't know the scale of these mines. So I've taken some time to kind of read about them, and they are absolutely, as you're saying, crazy and wild. The size of these things. Just to give you another peek at this particular photograph, this thing really blew me off. Probably the biggest, the highest place in this particular thing. But whatever, I mean, there are underground cities in the entire place. No wonder this thing is taking so much time. So if there are integrated tunnels under the city, you can imagine any offensive force, may it be the Russians, Americans, ourselves, or anybody, will take a long time to kind of inch by inch go forward, clearing this entire area. So they have to actually clear on top of the ground and then underground as well. So it's double the kind of effort. So that's something that it gives you a basic idea of what's happening there. The BBC reported a couple of days, actually today, Russian controls most of the pounded salt mine of Solidar. As I said, Ukrainian military medic who came out of Bakhmut some time back talks about very high casualties in a very short time. Bakhmut and the Battle of Solidar and Bakhmut has been termed as a meat grinder. Um, it's terrible. Both the forces are accusing each other of driving on their own dead bodies to kind of attack. I mean, it's beyond recognition because some estimates actually talk about Ukrainian losses to about 5 to 700 men in that entire area every day. As a matter of fact, I couldn't put this up. I just read this. The it seems Zelensky has put out a statement to the guys that were fighting in Solidar is to thank them for the time that they've bought the Ukrainian state. So you can imagine the concept was basically exchanging lives for time and holding every inch. And when you do that, you've got very high casualties. I'll talk about the casualties as we go forward. Kuleba, Dmytro Kuleba is their foreign minister of Ukraine. He says, "We are grateful to the partners for help, but no one has done enough." Doesn't it sound to a large extent like Pakistan? The shortest way to defeat the Russian invaders is to provide Ukraine with all the weapons it needs from the international partners. The chief of the Ukrainian army, General Zaluzny, had come out and done an interview with the Economist, and he talked about getting about 300 tanks, 300 armored fighting vehicles, some I don't know F-16 fighter aircraft, some 50 100 of them, and a whole bunch of things. It was basically the army that he had to begin with, and then he said, I'll be able to push the Russians back. He didn't say we will be able to win and everything like that. He just said we will be able to keep the Russians and push them back from areas that we have a problem in. So that's why now this particular thing was also put out on a tweet. It tells you the kind of desperation which is coming out in the Ukrainians, evidently so because of whatever's happening in their country. It's a sad situation for them because they've been forced into this particular thing. And anyways, now, U.S. Colonel training Zelensky's forces accuses soldiers of war atrocities. Now, this was very interesting that came out. There's a guy called Andrew Milburn, who's the retired U.S. Marine Colonel. He basically has blamed the Ukrainian army for, all kinds of atrocities, shooting of surrendered soldiers and stuff like that. He's the founder and CEO of the Mozart Group. Now, this is interesting because the Russians have something called the Wagner. So these guys created something called the Mozart, and they've been kind of training the Ukrainian forces and stuff like that towards fighting the Russian army there and stuff. By the way, this guy has said enough. I'm done. I can't take this anymore. He's left Ukraine. Casualties, as I was talking about, Russian sources today actually hacked up something. Of course, they're damn good at all this hacking nonsense. They hacked up something and they found a document which they allegedly, let me put this across very clearly, it is alleged and it's there on the internet. It's all over the place, so you can see it. It's from the so-called anarchist combatant group, and this thing says that there's a leaked document from the personal center of the armed forces of Ukraine, which was sent to the chief of general staff of the armed forces of Ukraine, where they talk about number of dead soldiers who were cognized as missing is 35,382. What that means is basically that they have taken 35,382 soldiers to be missing in action. Now, when you say missing in action, it is because their bodies were not found. Worst comes to worst, they're buried somewhere, something. You don't know. It's very, very interesting to know that these kind of stuff is coming out. I don't know if it's real or not, but that takes, if you just look at that and say, okay, if this is real, Ursula von der Leyen, about a month and a half ago, had blurted out about 100,000 Ukrainian soldiers have died. This takes up with the current losses of 5 to 700 men a day. I'm just giving that approximation of about 135 to 150,000 troops have already died. Now, when you talk about deaths in a war, this is a thumb rule which pretty much everybody agrees with. Three times the soldiers would also be injured. So that you can just do the maths, it's about 450,000 soldiers that are injured. Ukraine started this entire fracas with about 6 to 700,000 soldiers. That means they're down to about 150, 175,000 soldiers with their army right now. And out of them, how many are actually, you know, battle fighting and war fighting? Because when you talk about soldiers, they're also support, they're also a whole lot of other things, logistics, drivers, medics, and this and that and the other. So this annex to this letter contains so many sheets, just you can read it here, 667 sheets of names with dates of birth in total. Or there's a lot more. Amphibious assault troops, 398 sheets. Representatives of the Navy, 242 sheets. These guys have their names, date of birth, addresses, and stuff like that in these particular sheets. So this has been hacked, has been put out into the public domain as well. Putin, interestingly, actually put out this thing for a ceasefire. Now, he said this is a Christmas ceasefire. Interestingly, a lot of people might have got this thought that why are they celebrating Christmas on the 6th and 7th of January? Now, the Russians follow the Orthodox calendar, which is, a little away from the Georgian calendar. Their holidays and all that are set according to that. So their Christmas is on the 7th. Ukraine, some time ago, because Orthodox Church is basically the Russian Orthodox Church, had banned this church in their country. There was a huge protest in Ukraine as well about this. People didn't like it because a lot of people consider themselves to be Orthodox. Um, so what happened is that Putin said, okay, 36 hours ceasefire. They built this whole story that the Patriarch of Moscow had sent in a letter to Russia and said, this, that, and the other. We we want to get a ceasefire done for 36 hours. It's a matter of God, and so on and so forth. So he said, okay, fine, and he put out this thing. That's the story, okay? So Ukraine basically now had two choices. If they would have agreed to the ceasefire, they would have recognized the Orthodox Church again. So they refused. Basically, what it had to do with the war is an information warfare game. There was nothing, because, as a matter of fact, during the time when the ceasefire was allegedly on, both sides were fighting, and the Battle of Solidar actually picked up pace during the time of the ceasefire. So it's just all sorts of stuff. I think the Russians are learning a bit of a lessons with regards to, um, you know, information warfare to begin with. Now, I'd like to put this across. These guys, Ukrainians, have been fighting for the past year, and they're tough nuts. There's no question about it. As a matter of fact, the Wagner chief has said that Ukrainian soldiers are fighting in Solidar with honor. Of course, they're known for, not the Ukrainian army as per se, but these, right wing movements which are there, like the right sector, the Azov, and all these guys. They've been known for atrocities. Today, they've been actually, there are reports, now I can't confirm it, of these guys actually, targeting any Ukrainian army soldiers who decide to withdraw from a particular position. Just like, in the 30s, the Germans and the Soviets actually did it to their own soldiers. This is something which is happening. It's not, I mean, we would find that to be atrocious. It's not alien to that region. It's happened in the First World War, in the Second World War. This is, I think, it's part of the game there. It's terrible, but it's what it is. But having said that, the Ukrainian army, the general staff, and everybody has been at it for the past 1 year, and one has to give them that they've held their up. I mean, with whatever they've got, they've been able to do whatever they've had. But I think at this moment, it's time to kind of call it a day. But that's just my opinion. Washington Post call it a day, right? So Washington Post interestingly has three, scenarios that they talk about how the war should end. The first scenario talks about what Zelensky had said. Putin withdraws. He basically goes back from everywhere and stuff like that, clears up the country, gives his neck for the trial, all the Russian general staff and all that, all on war trials and stuff like that. So that's the first scenario. The second scenario talks about the Russian troops withdrawing to the positions of 24th February again, and Crimea and that part of Donbass kind of remains in Russian control. The third is the most amazing, by the way, envisages all the territories, Donetsk, Luhansk, Crimea, Donetsk, Luhansk, everything cleared except for Crimea, and Donbass and everything would be resolved through negotiations. Interestingly, they don't talk about a flip side, that what if the Russians win? So they've kind of put it in their mind, and this is what the media narrative is all about, that the Russians can't win. When somebody is so hardened about that particular thing, that tells you there's something wrong, which is what told me there was something wrong in the reporting. And that's when I started researching, and I said, okay, this is completely the opposite. Remember, Ukraine as a country is getting devastated. They're finished. The Russians aren't. And look at it from another Western point of view. During the Second World War, the Americans lost some about 300 or 500,000 soldiers, but their country was intact. The rest of the world, in terms of not the rest of the world, but North Africa, Europe, Russia, parts of China, Japan, the Pacific, all was in ruins. They were one of the few countries that was standing, badly damaged, but standing. That's what Russia is today. So that's a lesson that I think the West has forgotten. This is an interesting thing that came out today, which where Russia and Belarus have actually launched exercises from the January 16th to the February 1st. Remember, guys, the last time when the invasion happened, it was during some exercises that the Russians and the Belarusians were having. So there is a huge aviation component out of this entire thing. All airfields and will be used and this and that. And I don't know whether this is going to be a feint for the Russians, that they will actually split up whatever little of the Ukrainian army is there, take them up to a point to the north, and try and just keep on poking them, that they will just come in and threaten Kiev and finish up their objectives in the east. Because till the time they don't finish up in the east, I personally don't think, and I'm not again a this thing, but as an analyst, I don't think the Russians will go in for any large scale attack till the time they're not done with these lines and stuff like that. Because as somebody had written, that these lines and the defensive that have been created by the Ukrainians are pretty strong, so it may result in a backfire for the Russians. Now, this was interesting. There was a strike that was done on the New Year's Day, where initially Ukraine claimed about 400 Russian soldiers. Then the claim was put off, and this and that. And then the West and Russia, everybody came down to agree about 89 to 93 soldiers. Certain publications in the West talk about 100 soldiers were killed in a Ukrainian strike. Incidentally, this is interesting for Indian security as well, because the rumor has it that one of the soldiers was using a cell phone, and somebody triangulated that cell phone, figured out this was the Russian army, and fired a rocket. They fired actually four rockets. Two of them were intercepted. Two of them went straight into the barracks that they were staying. And 89 soldiers. I'm going to just take 89 for the minute. I don't know how many would be there, but let's just stick with this figure. The Russians obviously had to retaliate. They say that they have killed about 600 Ukrainian soldiers. I mean, I don't know. And this is a clipping I found in South China Morning Post. So I don't know 600, but I'm sure a large number of Ukrainian soldiers have been killed in this entire game, and this was a retaliatory strike. Now, this is the problem. The more the Western powers are going to feed in weapons into Ukraine, Ukrainians will try and actually get in some shot or the other at the Russians. We've had these missile strikes in Russian airfields. Um, so all this will happen, and then it's a cyclic thing. They will attack, and these guys will retaliate, and you know, retaliation is always bigger than the attack. So it's just a cyclic thing. Some interesting tidbits I wanted to share with you guys. Now, Polish Prime Minister, and this actually did a lot of rounds on social media, especially in Europe a couple of days ago. He was the informant to this German Stasi back during the Cold War. So that's interesting to know. It puts a little context to why the Polish are so hardened about this whole war. After Germany, Merkel, now it's France. François Hollandaise has actually said that we had no intention of implementing the Minsk 2014-15 agreements. At the end of it, we just were buying Ukraine some time to kind of build up their army so that they can attack Russia. Uh, it's interesting that all these guys are coming up and saying all this. I don't know at the moment what they're getting to. uh, is it that they're trying to kind of destabilize the environment a little bit or push their populations away from the west? Some amounts of hints are coming out, but nothing concrete has come up. But it's interesting, these guys are coming out and talking today. Now, what does one believe? Elon Musk, that maverick, I don't personally subscribe to him. I don't trust him to a large extent, but he said this, and he's been putting out a lot of these Twitter files and stuff like that. This was interesting. It's to the topic, so I've put it up. Elon Musk says Russiagate was one of the most deranged and unhinged conspiracy theories spread by the media. Now, you know, that just gives you a little unsettled feeling at the back of your throat, because if that's what can happen, guys, just look at it from our perspective, the kind of narratives that could be built up. And you all know my favorite word is narratives, because it's the narratives that we fight. It's armies, yes, they do, and they also are fighting narratives at the end of it. There's a hot battle that takes place, and there's a back end battle, which is the information warfare, which is very, very strong today. If they could drag on a country like United States with a concept of Russia Gate, and if I'm supposed to believe Elon Musk, that's crazy. Sorry about that. Now, you know, I was watching a debate. Always happens in a life. I was watching a debate, and somebody actually mentioned this word, and I found it to be very interesting. Ukrainistan. And then this person also said, if this place was Ukrainistan, the West would have invaded it themselves. Just a joke, nothing part of it, but I thought I'll just share it with all of you. This is a cartoon I found, which Zelensky standing there. The Russian president is standing there. War on Ukraine, and the American is filling up his tank with Russian oil that the Americans have bought. So you can imagine and this is something, again, guys, we've discussed. So I don't want to go through it about the hypocrisy of Russian oil. I've written about it. I have spoken about it. It's complete hypocrisy. What's happening with the weapons? As I said, Stoltenberg today in the afternoon gave a talk where, of course, Stoltenberg, Ursula von der Leyen, and I forget one more person was there. All three of them gave a press conference, and he said that we've depleted our military reserves by providing aid to Ukraine, but we still need to go on and do what we are doing. An interesting warmonger of the past, Condoleezza Rice and Robert Gates, actually put out an article in sort of an interview sort of a form in the Washington Post, and they said time is on you, not on Ukraine's side. A dramatic increase in military supplies and capability before Western pressures on Ukraine to negotiate a ceasefire mount, rewarding Putin's patience. So I don't know which direction is the narrative within US kind of shifting across. We know the political changes that have happened there. You've got McCarthy, who's just come in as the new speaker. So I don't know if there is going to be a flip across or there's going to be a speed breaker. And that's one of the reasons why the Democrats were trying to push in as much as money as possible into Ukraine before this change happens. Let's wait and watch. US eyes new weapons for Ukraine as Kiev fears a new Russian offensive. So that's again whether offensive or not that we can discuss as we go forward. But they're talking about JDAMs, that's Joint Direct Attack Munition Kits. They're talking about new rocket systems. They're talking about these slow exploding bombs. They're talking about uh, you know armored fighting vehicles. Now I'm going to read the second paragraph, which talks about one US official also noted that Ukraine has abided by the limitations on the use of weapons the West has provided so far, tempering reservations about sending more capable systems. Since the announcement of Bradleys, now Bradleys are armored fighting vehicles. Guys, there's a documentary about how this Bradley was made and how the US wasted wasted money on the Bradleys. It's an interesting one. You can just find it on YouTube. So, announcement of sending Bradleys to Ukraine. There have been questions surrounding what would come next, namely if the US would consider M1A1 Abrams tanks. This is their, like the main battle tank. Ask about reluctance to provide Abrams to Ukraine on Friday. Cooper, who's basically Secretary of Defense, Laura Cooper, she says administration is always looking at what Ukraine needs, but that we must also have to be cognizant of maintenance and sustainment considerations with these tanks. Certainly, we know that Abrams tanks, in addition to being a gas guzzler, is quite challenging to maintain. Hmm, interesting. That's the U.S. Deputy Assistant Defense Secretary Laura Cooper for you, ladies and gentlemen. Gas guzzler and challenging to maintain their main battle tank. Italy says technical issues delay supply of air defense systems to Ukraine. They talk about, they they basically talk about some technical issues that have come across. Then the technical issues have been described as political tensions, considerations, and equipment shortages. भाई अपने पास है नहीं दूसरे को भेजने के लिए चलेंगे. Sweden will send Archer artillery systems to Ukraine. Sweden is set to transfer these systems. Mr. Billstorm, who's their foreign minister, says Ukraine needs more offensive weapons from the West, and Sweden had to contribute. It's not a question whether we should send it, but when we send it, right? So this is, he also said that we have not understood that if Ukraine does not get the military equipment needed to be able to win on the battlefield, this war will drag on, which only will benefit Vladimir Putin. I hope, thank God, that there is some realization of that particular aspect. He said it, but I think he said it as a statement and not as a policy. Britain is considering supplying a handful of Challenger 2 tanks. Now, handful means 10, by the way, 10 or 12 of them. Germany has said no, that we will not give our Leopard 2 tanks. The US is sending Striker armored combat vehicles to Ukraine, as I just said. They were not sending the M1 A1. They're sending these Bradleys and the Strikers to Ukraine. So coming back, it's basically a trickle of weapons which are going to go back into Ukraine. 10 tanks, 15 this, 20 this. Bradleys, I think the number is about 50 for a front which is 800 miles. 50 armored fighting vehicles. All right. What's happening in Europe? Germany, oh Germany, oh Germany, oh Germany. Now I'm going to take a little bit to discuss Germany, just a minute or two, where German Chancellor Olaf Scholz promised to transfer 40 Marder infantry fighting vehicles to Ukraine by the end of March. However, it turned out finding the promised technique is not easy. The Bundeswehr will have to remove armored personnel carriers from its own military stocks, which represents a huge burden for Germany, according to an article published in Der Spiegel, which is their main newspaper in Germany. Since the government is not prepared for delivery of Marder armored personnel carriers, the Bundeswehr has to empty out its own warehouses, which are poorly organized. Far-sighted politicians work differently, said Henning Otte, deputy chairman of the German Defense Committee. Der Spiegel also wrote the state of the German armed forces is an embarrassment. Right? NATO, okay. Uh, it's and there's some details. There are problems with the Puma BMPs, self-propelled howitzers, tanks, and aircraft. Publication also writes that Bundeswehr is now looking for sources of this leaked information about their weapons going bad and stuff like that. So there's a whole lot of chaos which is happening in Germany. Um, German retirees from the army rose up by almost 500% in 2022 due to their unwillingness to be involved in the Ukraine war. I understand why would someone fight. Now, Germany has no current plans of sending the Leopard 2 to Ukraine. Germany last week announced that it was sending these vehicles, uh, and German Chancellor has said we will not be sending any weapons unilaterally. There was a survey that was done in Germany that it was done by this broadcasting association called ARD, which found 53% of the Germans opposed NATO membership for Ukraine, and 28% were in favor, and 19% had no opinion. Most of the Germans believe that Russia has the high moral ground in the matter of NATO expansion. Remember, the half of Germany, which is East Germany, was with Russia for a long time. So they still have that. And that was not very far off. That's 1991. Germany is an interesting case because if Germany flips, and recently I've seen Germany has kind of quieted down. Macron has been talking about little bit here and there, but Macron is a politician. He talks to the audience. So when he audiences of a certain kind, he talks like that. He's quite flippy that way. He's quite slippery that way. Olaf Scholz does not have that luxury. France still has its own energy from Algeria and stuff like that. They're able to get stuff. Germany does not. The German economy is kind of taking a beat. There are protests. Deindustrialization has already started up. They're losing their factories. They're losing a lot of stuff. And there are rumors that the Germans and the Russians are in talks to switch on Nord Stream 2. Because remember, currently they have stocks to probably last through the winter, but next year they won't. Poland, I call him the Pakistan of Europe. Uh, Ukrainistan is Afghanistan, and Poland is the Pakistan because he's been basically doing all the supply. I don't know how much he's keeping for himself. It gives me a little doubt when suddenly you hear a news that they are going to mobilize 200,000 soldiers in armored structures. There've been talks about Poland having eyes on Western Ukraine. There've been talks about Poland trying to finger around with Belarus. I don't know which direction they're going to go to, but this mobilization has started. Apart from that, Polish and Germans are actually in a tussle for the Second World War. The Polish are asking Germans for $3.1 trillion as reparations from the Second World War. The Germans said, "Oh, really? Give us our land back." Remember, Poland's borders were adjusted to, kind of give certain parts to Germany, and it got certain parts from, the east, from Ukraine, and entire thing. So there's a whole lot of gummit. One of the things that you must understand: borders have been fluid in Europe for centuries. It's not something which is very new. Now, my thoughts coming to the end of this presentation. Russian offensive plans. Belarus exercise is the first point that I say. It's a little curious when you suddenly see an exercise starting up in Belarus because this is the same time as last year. Now, either the Russians, under the kind of guise of an exercise, would go in for this offensive or they will do it after the exercise. I'm not sure. We'll have to wait and watch. Mobilization, of course, is complete. Training is complete, and this is what the Russians themselves are talking about today. Ground starting to freeze, especially in the south. Now, north has already frozen. You know, about 5 6 days ago, the daytime temperatures in the southern Ukraine have started dropping below zero, which talks about the ground becoming harder. That is what a lot of military analysts are talking about. The Russians are waiting for. Let's wait and watch. Some people say that there won't be any offensive and the Russians will basically just maneuver and kind of come close. They won't have these big arrow offensives and stuff like that. That can also be one, but I personally feel before any offensive happens, the Russians will clear out the Donetsk People's Republic before they actually do anything because that is something that they want to take. and the Ukrainians are fighting inch by inch. So it's going to be damn difficult for you to carry out a huge offensive where you're stuck in a place with a dead wall in front of you. Either ways, guys, Ukraine is done. Now, the last missile strike, correct me if I'm wrong, was on the 5th or the 6th. Today is the 10th, so probably tomorrow or day after, every 6 or 7 days, there's a huge strike that takes place. I don't know, but Ukraine is done. I don't think there'll be any viable country called Ukraine after this, because the reconstruction costs have been termed to be trillions of dollars at the moment. Zelensky did go to US. There was a lot of condemnation on how he behaved himself, how he was dressing up, dirty, shabby clothes and stuff like that. A lot of people didn't like it. Um, People didn't appreciate the fact that he was given a place in the Congress to talk about his whole stuff. Uh, there is a small minority in US which is kind of waking up. So let's see what's going to go forward as days go by. Ukrainian army chief, as I discussed with you some time ago, asked for a whole new army. He says then only I can do anything. Otherwise, he didn't say otherwise, but that's implied. Russian energy production and sale is up by 2% since last month. That's 2% seems very small. Remember, their sales have continuously grown since the months of April and May. Now, if Ukraine is winning, why is the Ukrainian, president and army chief and their foreign minister, saying you've not done enough and all that? Why are they begging for weapons? And this is the flawed narrative that has been sold to us. No, not sold. We've not bought it, so it was on sale to us, if I may. Uh, Brazil, interesting case, massive protests happening. Brazil walked away from this entire Western thing and said, I'm done. I am going to be away from all this stuff. And they've said, we want to go the BRICS way. Israel has a new government with Benjamin Netanyahu. Remember, Netanyahu and Putin have very, very good, uh, a very good kind of equation. So it's quite interesting how things are going to go forward. My last point is about media in US, UK, and EU. US has still a trickle of the other side where people like Tucker Carlson have started questioning. There are loads of independent speakers that are on YouTube. They talk and they're damn popular about their opinions. Uh, so there is some sort of no, I won't say call it an opposition, but a differential thought which is building up in the US. That's missing in England. Absolutely missing. There is hardly a voice talking sanity. You'll probably have this one odd article in the Guardian or the Telegraph once in a month. Beyond that, they are, Ukraine, Ukraine, Ukraine. That's it. EU, for that matter, has differential voices. We've seen people talking in the EU Parliament about what is happening in Europe and the great big loot which is taking place within Ukraine. So there are differential voices. EU has countries which are opposing this particular game which is being played, which is places like Hungary, Croatia, and so on and so forth. So there is some sort of an opposition within the EU countries as well. But UK has been dead straight head ahead. Global Times cartoons, I shouldn't be using it, but I found it to be very funny, and that's Uncle Sam throwing off the Ukraine burnt card. And that brings me to my last point. Remember one thing, after Uncle Sam is done with the war, they just stop talking about it. Will that happen to Ukraine? Is a question I ask you. Thanks so much for hearing me go on for about 43 minutes. I'm ready for your questions, your comments. There are loads of them. I think you guys were doing some discussion amongst yourself as well. I don't know what that is about, so let's see if it's interesting. Naveen, thank you so much for your contribution as always. Will the war come down to personal headcount? Who runs out of soldiers first? Never mind the weapons. Well, to a point, it will come down to personal headcounts all the time. It is not something that nobody has an endless set of manpower. It's about military mathematics in terms of the loss ratio or the kill ratio. How many Russian soldiers die for every Ukrainian soldier that is killed, or how many Ukrainian soldiers die for every Russian soldier that is killed. So till some time ago, people are talking about 1:8 Russia is to Ukraine. So for every one Russian soldier, it was eight Ukrainian soldiers that were losing their lives. In the Battle of Bakhmut, a lot of people have said that ratio has gone up to 1 is to 10. So you can do the math, but Ukraine will have limited manpower. Remember, the Russians have 25 million reservists. These are guys who've served in the armed forces, served in the territorial armies, served in those local militias and stuff like that. Ukraine is now, they had a population of about 44 million, about 10 million left, 34. A lot of them will be women and children and the elderly. So fighting men were about 5 to 6 million. Uh, you can't have everybody fighting there. So they had about, when they began, they had about 700,000. Some people say they had increased a little bit, but today I presume they're about 150, 175,000 trained, untrained, amalgamation of troops within Ukraine. So yeah, let's see how that goes forward. Adi twos, how does G20 fit in it? Putin and Zelensky attending or not, plus chances of peace formula. And broadly, how does Ukraine impact 2024 elections in the US? That's a heavy question, Naveen, and thank you so much for your contribution. I'll just keep it on because I'll forget the questions otherwise. How does G20? G20 is interesting because India, till now, has refused to call Zelensky over for this because remember, Zelensky is not part of the G20. So again, he was there everywhere as a bloody fixture, which is not appreciable. I think he's going for the Filmfare Awards tonight. The Life. He did a Vogue photo shoot. The Life. G20 is going to be interesting because India will ensure that Russians are kind of in the G20 because they've said that we would appreciate everybody's partnership. So that will be an interesting twist because, again, remember, India played a large role when it happened in Indonesia to keep the people within the room. And Minister Jaishankar has spoken about it, that we had to go across and do a lot of up and down with people to kind of keep them calm and say, let's sit down in the same room and talk. There were still very silly things like the German foreign minister, for that matter, Annalena Baerbock, who refused to shake hands with Sergei Lavrov. Now, she's not fighting the war. I mean, it's childish. That's all. But yeah, that's the thing. It is a great opportunity for us to kind of. I don't think peace formula is something which is in our hands, but it's a great opportunity for us to get both the major sides, that's the Russians and the West, to sit down and probably have a certain conversation. You know, it's like beyond that, I don't see any scope for negotiations at this moment. Because remember one thing, if you finish this war right now, both will have a lot of regrets. I should have done this, I should have done this, I should have done this. A lot of blood has been spilled. So, till the time either side does not come to a particular conclusion, you can switch off a war right now, but it will fire up again after 5, 10 years, or 3 years, or 4 years. It's not going to be this thing. US elections is going to be very interesting, Naveen, because if Joe Biden falls on his face, and that's going to be the second fall on his face, Afghanistan and then Ukraine, there is going to be challenges for him. And this time with, I think, Elon Musk, who's going to play a game at the back end with Twitter and ensure a lot of the democratic control is going to be removed, is going to be challenges for the Democrats to actually come back to power. That's something that I read of it at the moment. Not that Trump is the brightest bulb in the lot, but let's see. Zelensky came back to the US with Patriot, came back from the US with Patriot missiles. And any initial lead on their deployment and performance? Thank you, Naveen, for that question and your contribution. Very simple. Patriot missiles are point defense systems, which means they're giving about, I think, battery, which is about 8 or 10 launchers. They each can have, I think, about 12 missiles each. So that's about 120, 130 missiles launched up and ready. And for every target, you got to fire two. So that's there. Plus, when you do this, you have to have an integrated radar system, which is in a small locality. There was talk about some military leaders who from the US who were talking about, if it's required, you'll need not just one, they're going to be a lot. So this to me seems like protecting a certain setup, probably in Kiev, the center of the government, president and defense minister, or the the army headquarters or something like that, from these drone strikes that are coming in. So it looks like a point defense system. Plus, Patriot has an issue. They are very good with tactical ballistic missiles. They're very good with aircraft. They've not proven that good with um, what do you call drones. Now, with missiles also there have been challenges, because we just a couple of days ago, the US air base in Syria got hit by a missile where Patriots, by the way, was there. The Saudis are using these, and we know what kind of attacks that their oil fields had. So there's a lot that which is you know in the shadows with regards to these Patriot systems. A lot of people say that these systems are a part of an air defense structure. For example, the S-400 is a complete air defense structure from ground level to about 50, 60,000 feet. They have all sorts of systems to monitor this. Now, Patriot is a part of that complete, all full dimension kind of air defense system. I don't know the technical word is kind of losing. I'm losing the grip of the word right now, but it's a part of that particular system. So Patriot cannot look below a certain height, above a certain height. It can't detect smaller objects and stuff like that. So that's one of the drawbacks which are being seen right now, and there are examples of it. If only Germany under Merkel had said to follow Minsk, all would be good, but she did not. Russia was recovering, and people saw Russia as a threat to be dealt with. So EU opposition, no EU opposition to US agenda. How will they oppose her? How will they? Remember, EU still has a US representative who sits there. He's their political representative of the United States that sits inside the US, the EU Parliament. How will they, how will they do this? It's to me, it is the whole idea of actually this Minsk, the way it is coming out today, seems like any other agreement that we've seen. So many Treaty of Versailles and this and that, where just mull over the damn thing, move forward, and let's see what happens. What can Germany achieve now by changing sides? It would halt the deindustrialization. I don't think so. But anyways, it would keep high-flying paying jobs in Germany. Would save the rest of Europe, but it requires a statesman. Your last thing, I don't think all the rest can happen that easily. But the last thing requires a statement is a big thing, because I don't personally feel the current gentleman has it in him to lead the country as a statesman, as what you call it. Uh, do you consider Zelensky as a puppet of the USA, or the whole Europe wants to lick USA's feet? Okay, that's a little extreme, but um, see, Zelensky, there is a thing called globalism, right? There are neoconservatives, they're called neocons, and globalists. Ukraine is part of this whole globalist agenda to kind of, weaken Europe, and that's what a lot of people say. The I personally find the presumption of Russia as an enemy to be very, very weird. So that's something which is there now. How do you reduce Russia or to fix Russia? Is you create a war on Russia's doorstep. So that's what Ukraine is. It's Zelensky is just another guy. They would have, if it's not Zelensky, they would have found 15 others. Money could probably buy anything. And Eastern Europe has a bit of a challenge with regards to integrity in certain areas. Yeah, you're right. Baker's statement is true, but it's not a commitment. Of course, it isn't. I mean, that's what words are all about with statesmen, but that's what it is. Having said that, the Russians had enough time, you're right, to kind of counter this NATO movement across, but they didn't. They found this time when they were strong enough and they had their economy set up, or as per their, kind of thing, they did what they did. Battle of Bakhmut is another Stalin Guard. Absolutely. I think when the books will be written, it will be written about this, because these are 4, 5, 6 months of fighting over a city. It's terrible. Uh, US and UK don't want this war to end. It benefits their agenda and defense business. Yes, to a large extent. I don't think UK to any extent, as a matter of fact, but US, yes. Remember, UK is, you know, UK is just, I would say, an extension of the US with regards to these kind of matters. UK could have taken a course of its own, especially after Brexit. It would have been termed as a large power by standing up on its own 2 feet and doing something, but who would tell those Brits to do anything good for themselves? Okay, I think you guys are all talking about these, notorious little tunnels. Mumbai Metro is notorious for underground tunnels and stuff like that. See, tunnels are a part of a very Soviet structure. Tunnels were made as bomb shelters for nuclear bombs and stuff like that. But these are salt mines. There's differences. There's gypsum here, there's salt here, there's a whole lot of other things which is found in these mines. I'm sure they were used as bomb shelters or something like that, but they were basically used as mines till long, long time, for a long, long time. Uh, Indian Army should also make similar tunnel networks and underground caves to house Indian Army resources close to LAC, LOC. Sir, only if LAC, LOC was at zero level height or 1,000, 2,000 feet. Our LAC and LOC starts at 6,000 feet, especially in the regions of JNK and Ladakh. You can't. I mean, you can make probably a small tunnel as these terrorists kind of dig around the place to infiltrate some weapons and here and there, but to store an army, you saw the size of the tunnels that I had put across. So it's a little far fetched. It's having said that. See, I'd like to say one thing about the whole defensive structure in these countries. Remember, they were under the Cold War threat, and they had a threat of American bombs falling on them. So, and when I say bombs, is nuclear bombs. Even the Americans had this whole anti nuclear system that they had pushed to people's houses. They had to. There was this thing called for kids. They used to have this thing called duck and cover. They had these things of survival houses built up in their basements and stuff like that. They had these leaflets and they had the drills and a whole lot of things that were there. So yeah, people who were under direct threat of nuclear weapons and stuff like that did a lot of things during those days. USA can fund Ukraine from far away, but when in Eastern Europe, NATO included, lose the fight to any further, I think Russia is preparing for that moment. Yeah, of course, rest of EU is not pleased taking Ukrainian refugees. Look at YouTube videos from Ireland, Central EU, where Ukraine single males are migrated, dumping women, children, and other EU states. Absolutely. There is a lot which is happening that we don't come to know on the social media, on the mainstream media. Poland had a lot of these benefits for Ukrainian citizens and Ukrainian refugees. I believe that they are now removing them, and they're saying enough is enough. The crime rates have gone up in many countries and stuff like that. So it's quite, yeah. These guys don't have work to do, so they will do all sorts of things. As a matter of fact, in a slowing down economy, let's say for any country, jobs are obviously reducing, and if there are refugees and they take those jobs, so local people get a little, unhappy about it. Yeah. So you say tunneling a mountain is a hard business, salt mines are easier. Absolutely, that's my point. It's see, we can always look at Ukraine is flat, right? The reason they're not able to move forward is because this area is, as I said, urbanized. So when you do a lot of bombing, all these urbanized becomes heap of cement, and each one of these heaps is like a defensive point. So it's takes time to kind of go forward. You have to keep on using your artillery and stuff like that, I would imagine, to break all these things. But salt mines are done for a different purpose altogether. So that thing, but of course, 80, 100 meters below the surface, you're also going to get, protected. Yeah, Gaurav, there is a movie on Bradley Procurement Saga. It's amazing. I mean, how the entire thing went forward. It's a satire to a large extent, but it's on a real story. Kiran says Poland nationalism is a bit surprise to me. They hate India a lot. Ground media in Poland is playing a lot to pump up Poland hatred towards every country. See, Poland says we were shortchanged in the Second World War. We took the maximum casualties. They didn't. The Russians did. Their country was removed. Like the western part of Ukraine, which is cities like Lvov and all that, was part of Poland. And so the Polish have this dream, and their media does talk about reunification with that entire land. So a lot of people are saying, yeah, these guys are mobilizing because they want to go into Ukraine and grab the Western Ukraine when uh, it's this when the Ukrainians are down. This is interesting. If the US saw what US is doing doing inside the US would invade US to liberate US from the US. I'm going to use that, yeah, brother. This was damn good. This is right. So it's this is what it is for a huge nuclear power of the world and one of the superpowers. Was the German public even consulted about what Germany will or do or not? It seemed that the leaders went ahead doing whatever. I'd be fuming at Germany's predicament if I was a German. So I'd ask this question rather about the Americans, because whether the American public has been spoken to about this war, where billions and billions, till now it seems $100 billion has been thrown into Ukraine. 100 billion. I mean, that's not a small amount. Yeah, that's 1 plus 30% of our defense budget. You, it's a country the size of France, little larger than that. Probably Karnataka and a little bit of Maharashtra, or probably whole of Maharashtra put together. $100 billion. You know there's something wrong in that place. You know the money is getting going somewhere here and there and stuff like that. So that's what is happening at the end of it. Funnily speaking, a lot of people say, India mein bahut corruption hai and this and that. Sorry to bring India, but let me just give you two bits of news, right? Ursula von der Leyen, the president of um, the EU's husband, was given a kickback from some company for the tune of $329 million. The vice president of EU has been chucked out, thrown out, and is being investigated for alleged bribes by the Qatari government to support the FIFA in Qatar. So there's just one or two examples. I don't want to spend too much time on it. It's just too much there. It's just too much which does not come out into the open. So if it does, it'll be crazy. Hello, Adi. What are the major fallouts from this entire Ukraine chapter, as we are seeing the creation of a white Afghanistan? Did it induce similar radicalization in EU like happened in Afghanistan? I'm going to give you a long shot, brother. I'm going to give you a long shot. My long shot thought is, you guys might think I'm mad, but I think US will have to go in and control Ukraine at some point of time. Remember one thing, US has tried to do this with so many countries. Whoever they've armed, they've had to go in and fight them. Look at it from history. It's been their game, it's what they've done, and I think they're going to end up doing that again, because this country is going to go off track when money and this and that is going to be out. So I don't know. That's one option. The second option is, remember one thing, who talks about Afghanistan in the US except for terrorism? Nobody talks about it. What's happening in terms of the people, this, that, nobody. Jo bhi hai. That's what the US's playbook is. Once they're done, they're done. They just turn the page and move forward. And they have the power to control the media. So they're able to do that. Remember that. During used Abhyas, we saw some trained guides to swoop on these drones and tip them. I don't know how that works, but it seems like an interesting idea. Absolutely, sir. We've got a lot of ideas, and I'm sure a lot of tactical ideas also coming up with regards to this from ground units. Just to give you guys a heads up, and again, we read these news and we probably miss them out. The BSF recently awarded two of its teams ₹1 lakh each for shooting down the maximum number of drones on the Punjab border. Now, for all the people that, a lot of defense analysts, if I may, who keep talking about the fact that India does not know how to fight drones and stuff like that, how are these drones getting shot down? And if these drones are getting shot down, there are certain anti drone systems that have been put in, which are resulting in a reduction of these drones, or increase in the numbers that are being shot down. So there's a lot that we don't know about warfare. Again, it's and I'd recommend let it be there. There's a lot of deficiencies in American weapon systems, but nobody points it out. F-35 most expensive, maintenance problem. Patriot is not able to handle most of the air defenses. Abram tanks are gas guzzlers and hard to maintain. Even many of the systems USA provided to Ukraine haven't really performed as they are portraying in the news. That's an interesting point. See, always remember there is that aspect. There is also the aspect about the fact that how are you using that weapon? Do you have basic maintenance capability or not? If a gun, for that matter, this discussion came up with the M777 because we also have it. A discussion came up and everybody said, "Oh, we bought this gun. This gun is not working in Ukraine, and this and that and the other." I, I don't really buy it because you don't know how the Ukrainians were using it. Were they even, I mean, kept properly or not? Were they overfiring it? Because remember one thing: every gun has a certain capacity. You can't overfire. The barrel will become hot. It will damage. So there are a lot of things. If the Ukrainians were in a desperate situation, "Lagai, dhar, 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 dhar," you'll have a problem. So it's something that you have to consider when you're analyzing weapons like this. Having said that, the Russian weapons have been known to be more hardier, and the American weapons have been known to be more sophisticated, but very, very difficult to maintain. For example, the MiGs and the Sukhois and stuff like that, they can take off on unprepared airfields, on literally, just a rolled piece of land, they'll take off and land, no problems. And you can find enough videos of this happening online. Americans have to clear up FOD, which is debris on the runway. They have to remove everything, make sure it is absolutely clear, and then only they start operating. So there is a difference there. The javelins did not work, but many units with batteries were too old to be charged. British anti-tank system worked well. Can't remember its name. Uh, Unlaws was its name. Yes, it did work to a large extent. What do you think of a C-type RAM system for that works for this cheap drones? I don't know. So there's a lot of testing which are happening, all of, and I know about with regards to hard and soft kills which are being tested across with a lot of different ranges. Because remember, when you're talking about these drones, it's not just tar tar tar. There are other ways of doing stuff. Because if you're doing tar 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 over a public area, if that damn thing has a bomb, it's going to fall off into a public area. So there's a lot of things that need to be considered before you get into tackling these drones. It's not a warfare system that you always will have. You will also have situations when you're dealing with the stuff in public areas. So you need to have a soft kill wherein it's either the system is corrupted and the handler is not able to handle it, or it comes into your control. Naveen, thanks so much. What we know about life has been screwed up in Ukraine. What is the state of the Russian society? Yeah, from what I see, they've got food to eat, they've got jobs. And as a matter of fact, the Western companies are rebranding themselves and opening themselves back in Russia. KFC is back, Apple is there, Lego is there. There are loads of, I mean, I have some friends in Russia and they tell me that everything is here. If you want, I'll take out some photographs and give it to you. I'll ask them to send me some live photographs and send it to you with date stamps. They've got stuff. They are suffering, of course, with regards to their economy. They've gone down by about 3 or 4%, but they've lost manpower. 30, 40, 50,000 soldiers, or 30 or 40,000 soldiers is a lot. Uh, Having said that, I don't think they're in the situation where what the West tells us, ki, oh, boss, Russia is going to fold, people are going to this thing. And by the way, Putin's approval rating were at 82% last week. So the Russians are actually happy with what's happening. A lot of the Russians are unhappy why he's not doing it fast and destroying Ukraine completely, but that's what it is. Yes, Amay, the movie's name is Pentagon Wars. It's a must watch. It's very, very interesting. As Professor Nalapat was saying yesterday, it is profitable to let yourself be convinced. Even US politicos are following it. Absolutely, I agree with you. There's no question. Nice session, Pinaki. Thank you so much. M777 has some titanium parts which are expensive to replace. I don't know if I'm correct. I'm sure they have, and they also have. They're very good guns, by the way. I mean, there's nothing wrong with them, but they have issues, with regards to how they've been used. Somebody who's not trained in it, if I give you a tank today, you'll probably hit it 3 times before it goes somewhere else. So I'm just talking common sense. I'm not going to get into the targeting system and the barrel length, and I have no clue about all that. But I know one thing for a factor, that if you have something, if you don't know how to use it, you're going to spoil it. So, and if you don't know how to even repair it, especially in the field during wartime, it's going to be difficult. That's like you and me taking out a car and not knowing how to change the damn spare wheel, and you're going out to the Himalayas with no uh, repair points. So it doesn't make common sense to me. Right, guys, last couple of questions. Now, I won't take any more after this. With growing anti immigrant settlement in EU, more right wing politicians winning power, Ukraine seems to be the perfect chaos to wreak havoc, settle scores, and make money out of it. A lot of people say that's happening, can't prove it. Sank Bankman Fried sure does give a little bit of a hint regards to what's happening in that part of the world. 10 billion just gone. I'm, I'm sure there is a lot of corruption everywhere. Yeah, so it's you know Brussels is the second largest lobbying center after Washington, which these lobbyist NGOs, individuals are not under any surveillance. They want to operate illegally. Lobbying is also legal. Yeah, uh, it is legal. It is very, very, you know, interesting how that happens. The Pakistanis keep talking about Indian lobby ने हमको छोड़ दिया है तो यार it is legal. Lobby is legal. Lobbying in terms of gifting is legal. So there's a lot that happens in those. Um, yeah, I think that's just about it, guys. Thank you so much. Hope you enjoyed this conversation and update about Ukraine. The last time we did it was with General Shaukin Chauhan, and I thought I'll just do a solo with you guys. Tomorrow will be General Shankar. I've also done two very interesting interviews. I'm just leaving a teaser here on Chinese influence, which I did today, and how it has Chinese influence crept up into Indian society, Indian media, Indian think tanks, and so on and so forth. So we will give you a bit of a sneak peek into that. I'll make some shorts and put it out. This is someone who's done a lot of research about this, and I'm grateful that he's spoken to me about it. I also had a conversation with someone from the shadows, from the intelligence, the military intelligence of things, who's spoken about how India can actually make itself a little more secure. So these two are interesting recorded interviews that I will be premiering in a day or two, and some very crazy, crazy stuff coming up in this next week. Of course, I think General Ryan will be joining us on Friday, and we will have, as I said, General Shankar tomorrow. Guys, thank you so much. Before I sign off, please, please, please like this video, subscribe to the channel. If you're new here, hit the bell icon so that you get notifications. If you can, please, please, please do help out the Dev Talks efforts. Thank you so much, all of you, for staying and going through this entire update. To catch up with you next time in a solo, and tomorrow, of course, with my guests. Jai Hind.